Eagle 6 in the train.
Roger.
Viper 1 bombs away. 125 high, above 20, Europe south.
Eagle 6 radar contact. Eagle 6 is visual.
And it goes left.
Hello and welcome back to the DCS SITREP. I'm your host once again, Prickly Hedgehog. Here we are talking about DCS World, which is the premier combat flight simulator for the home PC right now, and it's brought to us by Eagle Dynamics. This week's newsletter actually was fairly muted by comparison to the 2025 and beyond video, which attracted a large number of viewers and quite a lot of questions, and of course quite a bit of surprise and shock about the F-35, which, no pun intended, certainly wasn't on my radar. So the F-15C was something that, as I said in the reaction video, I was expecting at some point, but the F-35 really did throw me for a loop. Certainly has generated a lot of energy in the community, some positive, some negative, some questioning, and I have some questions myself. At least that's what I told Wags, and hopefully we can get together at some point here with, we've got a couple of things planned, myself and the Air Warfare group, with some further analysis and discussion about how 2024 went and likely how 2025 is going to go. I'm not too worried about the F-35 just yet, because although it has been announced, I still think there's quite a lot of work to be done on that, and that's not going to impact, as far as I'm aware and as far as I am concerned about, anything that's going on right now. So I'm very, very hopeful that 2025 is going to be a good year for us. So a small newsletter this week, as I think the 2025 and beyond video percolates. And what they did bring to us was an overview of what they think 2025 promises to be, which they said, and I agree with this, a busy and exciting year for Eagle Dynamics. They're telling us here that they're going to continue to improve the DCS core, which is expected. No mention of the Vulcan, which we are also waiting for, but they're telling us here that there's going to be enhancement of existing modules and the launch of new and valuable products. We saw that with the reference to the F-15C, which is in development. I don't expect to see that in 2025. Certainly, we should see some warbirds this year. That is the LA-7 and possibly the Corsair, possibly to / likely the Hellcat, based on what we observed recently. Now, along with their third-party affiliates, they say they aim to elevate DCS to new heights and hope that this video offers a good glimpse, that is the 2025 and beyond video, into some of the exciting things we are up to. While several of the products featured will be released in 2025, they say the video also focuses on our development promises, or priorities at least, and objectives, many of which, such as the dynamic campaign, have been in the works for far longer than planned, draining more resources than expected and sometimes creating frustration for many. This seems to be a constant with technology and engineering projects the world over, and par for the course, but they say here, as they push the envelope and seek to achieve even higher levels of realism and authenticity, they promise to do their very best to meet community expectations. So thank you for standing with us and for helping us improve and grow DCS, they say, and the understanding and support as they move onwards and upwards. So a lot to unpack in those statements. I don't see any particular problem with that. As you know, I'm fairly positive about the DCS ecosystem, what it's able to offer us, and sometimes I am surprised that people get really angry about this. Watch Ian Christie's video recently about that very topic, with people getting angry about things, I think sometimes unnecessarily. Criticism and constructive criticism, I think, is fine, and there are some good people out there doing some really good analysis of things that can be fixed in DCS world. One of those is Fly and Wire, who's doing a great job right now looking at some of the AI behavior surrounding missiles and air-to-air missiles. It's a good channel to look at, and some of that information is actually being fed back into Eagle Dynamics, or fed back to Eagle Dynamics so that they can make the appropriate adjustments. And I think it's a good way of, if you've got the skills to do it, this is a really helpful tool. As you would have seen in the latest Q&A from Wags, sometimes they miss stuff, even with all the testing, because it depends on what you're testing and depends on what you're looking for. And it's easy to, in this very complex environment, miss things. So this has been a particularly useful series of videos I've found. And as I've said, it has been picked up by Eagle Dynamics. So I always feel whenever you are giving feedback, you generally get a lot more results, or much better results, from carrot rather than outright stick. And I do worry that, as I've said in the past, there is some fine-tuned negativity that I don't know is necessarily helpful in all of the situations, that even if criticism is deserved, is providing the feedback that is going to be beneficial for the community and Eagle Dynamics and the game in general. Another actually great channel right now, and if you haven't, or if you're looking for more information about basic airmanship, Cabby has actually teamed up with DCS Hacks. He's doing some cool stuff on radio transmissions and also ATC stuff, but as well as that, he's got some airfield pattern work, which I think is very useful for those of you looking to learn some of the basics, because it is quite complex stuff if you have no background in aviation, or if you're just looking to, fine tune and polish your more professional ways of flying, rather than just, ignoring all the standard procedures and coming in hot every time on your landings and takeoffs and what have you. So there is some finesse to all of this, and it takes time and training. So you could spend a pretty amount of time just learning those basics and getting those polished, without encountering any of the other quirks and idiosyncrasies that sometimes people say is absolutely breaking the game. There is a depth of experience that you can have in this game without encountering a lot of the so-called problems that some people enjoy bringing up regularly. And I think that detracts from the quality of the experience that you can have in this game. Check out Ian Christie's, one of his latest videos about this very topic, which again discusses whether or not DCS is broken, and some of the other concepts surrounding Eagle Dynamics' business philosophy and the achievements that the team are working towards. So yeah, it's not as clear cut, I think, as sometimes people make out. There is a lot of fun to be had in this game. So that being said, do check that out. Cabby has, as I said, is teamed up with DCS Hacks. That's where you'll find that. And Cabby actually is a former U2 pilot, so he knows what he's talking about, and it's good stuff. Now, as I said, there wasn't a whole lot in this week's newsletter. There was a really interesting white paper that ED did on suspension struts and the pneumatic calculations, if you like, or calculations surrounding the pneumatic functions of tires in the game. And I won't read it out because it's pretty technical and probably not necessarily that interesting, but I'm not a physics person or math person really, but from my lay eyes, essentially what they did was added some extra equations in there to account for the fact that you have different types of struts and different pneumatic characteristics of tires, whether they are very bouncy, like the Mosquitoes tires, or they're a little bit more rigid, say on the FA-18, which slams down very, very hard on a carrier deck when it lands. So these struts and things, obviously, to calculate the way in which the aircraft compresses and actually lands realistically is actually quite an important thing. And they said that the previous calculations that they used were too limited ultimately for aircraft across a different range of types, weights, and again, as we mentioned, things like World War II aircraft, such as the Mosquito, which has those big balloony kind of bouncy tires. Now, this is important, I guess, in terms of, particularly for landing, if you want that realistic feeling, if it lands in a way that you can actually do it comfortably and it doesn't turn into a cartoon aircraft, it's actually quite an important little thing, including even just rolling along the ground. You want a degree of feel and realism, which is a very important portion of motion, even though it's only a small component perhaps for most flight, because you're generally in the air for much longer than you're on the ground, obviously. But again, landing and making it in a realistic fashion, as I said before, without the aircraft becoming almost cartoonish, is kind of an important thing. So it's an interesting little paper if you're interested in reading it. If you're a physics person, I enjoy the nerdiness of it, even though I don't have that background in physics and science, and certainly math. It's an interesting one to read. Now, lastly here, the team reminded us that they had the Mi-24P Hind livery competition. So there were 3 top winners for the livery competition. Number 1 was the German Democratic Republic, or GDR, Mi-24P number 361. That person got 100,000 ED miles and 1 free Eagle Dynamics module. Number 2 was the Soviet Bagram livery. So they got 50,000 ED miles. And lastly, the CZ livery, Czech livery, 25,000 ED miles. There were some runner-ups, and each of these people got 15,080 miles. We had the German Democratic Republic, post-unification Mi-24P number 361, US Coast Guard, fictional, Bagram Soviet Shmerl, Mi-24P Polish, 49 PSB, the 49th Assault Helicopter Regiment, Mi-24P Polish 56, Bilot, 56th Aviation Base, Bulgarian Air Force Bort 129, Mi-24P Azerbaijan Army 1993, and lastly the Egyptian Air Force. So thanks to those people who participated. It's always nice to have extra liveries, and there's some really clever and talented people out there doing really cool, realistic looking liveries these days. So, and we should see these new liveries in the game in the next update, so stay tuned for that. That's neat.
Big one, station time, 5 minutes to pushing up, reference 0.85.
Now, there was some news that wasn't covered in the main newsletter, and I know there was a lot of discussion about perhaps a lack of third-party information in the 2025 and beyond video. We didn't see a whole lot of World War II birds, as we have seen previously, like in the 2024 and beyond. There should be logical reasons for that. Well, one aircraft that did fall off my radar, and I apologize to the AVIRON team who are working on the Kafir, and thanks to those who reminded me about this and that there was actually an update. There are quite a few third-party modules out there that we are still waiting updates on. People asked me about the A7, for example, the F8, that's by magnitude 3. We still have, as I've said, a lack of news perhaps on some of these World War II birds as well. And Wags did cover in the Q&A video recently that they're still working hard on the World War II Marianas. So that's potentially a hold-up for some of the introduction of aircraft like the Hellcat, so on and so forth. So we'll wait and see how things pan out this year. But let's look at this Kafir, because it's an interesting one, and as I said, one that fell off my radar. Now, they've broken down their development into a series of sections, starting with the systems department. And they say here that the systems components were developed with real physics logic, simulating the behavior of electricity, fluids, and mechanics as they would in the real-world scenarios. We've seen this talked about with other developers, particularly the A7 by Flying Iron Simulations. They've done a lot of work in this area, and also the computational fluid dynamic stuff for the airframe. Anyway, they continue here. It's all about these or those geeky intricacies for a truly authentic experience. We integrated the plane systems primary and backup channels using the aforementioned physicalized components model. Additionally, we have developed specifically tailored testing tools to ensure that each component and accordingly each system meets expectations for well-defined behaviors, enhancing reliability. Cool. Now, the next section is the flight model department. They have been implementing a flight model based on actual wind tunnel testing data and are complementing it with a complex CFD, or computational fluid dynamics, which we mentioned before. Simulation to ensure accuracy. They're very excited to announce that this is currently in the pre-alpha stage and taking shape. So that is very good news. And then lastly here, they've talked here about the art department. This year, they refactored the entire cockpit to bring it to current DCS standards and fully integrated it with DCS. This means that everything is clickable and has functionality linked to the system it represents. We don't want to give away too much, so this is just a taste of what we've achieved, and they say here they can't wait to share more information with us when they are ready. They invite us to join their Instagram page as well for more updates and behind-the-scenes content. Now, they are on Discord here if you're looking for more information. I haven't checked out the Instagram page just yet, but interesting stuff. So you're looking hopefully at some images that they produced at the beginning of the year here. What an exciting little module. And we will see how, as I always say, and we'll see how things evolve over the course of 2025 and beyond. An exciting little module. I think it fits into a neat little niche here. And as I've said, there are places that you can enjoy some pretty good realism in this game and spend some time, actually quite a lot of time, learning how to fly these aircraft that are perhaps less sophisticated than some of the more modern jets, or the jets like the F-16, the F-18, the Apache particularly is one when you've got basically two people. The CPG role is pretty involved. You can spend a lot of time diving into the systems of these aircraft without actually leaving the ground sometimes. So these ones that are less involved electronically can still be an absolute blast.
Nick 2, Bandit nose, 15, 34,000, Singleton, Nick 2.
2, short time, Nick 2.
Nick 2 is dead. Make 3, bandit 060, 15 miles, 34,000, make 3.
All right, well, that rounds out another video for the DCS SITREP this week. Once again, thanks for listening in. And again, I'm very excited about 2025. I think we've got some really cool stuff coming, especially if we get the dynamic campaign. That will satiate a lot of demand and need in the community. Very interested in the Eurofighter and the development processes there, just as I am with the Kafir and also several other aircraft in the wings, the A6, for example, the A7, and the Corsair, the LA7, and the Hellcat. So there's lots of stuff we're waiting for. As for the F-35, I think it's an ambitious announcement. It makes sense to me on the one hand why Eagle Dynamics would throw this gauntlet down in a competitive environment. If there is enough open source information, and if you look around, there actually is a fair amount of open source information that you can glean to recreate this aircraft. How much fidelity you can get is obviously not something that I know. And I think in fairness, we also need to be realistic about how much fidelity there is and realism in the game, because even with a more complete aircraft, say like the FA-18C, I have never flown any of these aircraft, and I made this comment online earlier today. I have no idea what is truly realistic or not with no reference points, having not flown in any of the aircraft, having used any of the systems, having not had any hands-on experience with those systems, whether they are the radars, whether they're the electronic countermeasures, and so on and so forth. So there's a limitation to my, again, reference points for what is real and what is not. I've had discussions with real pilots, former and current, etc., who basically say, overall, the game is not bad, without referencing any specific systems. Obviously, they're not going to discuss some of those things because they're forbidden to do so. So there's a limitation on even in garnering information from people in the know for obvious reasons. And Wags has talked about this too. There's a limitation on how much they're going to be able to do realistically, because it may compromise national security in terms of tactics and things like that as well. We saw that with an interview that I did with Reflected Simulations with the Zone 5 campaign, and Dave Bio-Baranek provided a lot of the background material for that particular campaign. And Reflected said he was very cognizant and concerned about how much he could reveal with regards to tactics without, again, compromising national security. So if you talk to real pilots, those are the people that I use my cues for whether or not the game is realistic. And generally speaking, the feedback is that it's not bad, right? And we know it's not bad because there's quite a few of them out there flying the game, not necessarily even on YouTube, but in virtual squadrons and on other servers online, enjoying the experience of flying DCS World. So that's where I take my cues as to whether or not the game is realistic. And unfortunately, I don't have enough reference points to say 100% that the radar in the F-16C is representative of the real thing. It's an approximation, most likely. It gives us a pretty good understanding of what it does and how it works. And I've seen this in other games as well. We all know that if you have something on the scope, so to speak, within the sensor range of the radar, and it looks like a blip on the screen, you can use your cursor and potentially lock that target up or wave the cursor over it and get information based on data. So there's a lot of complex equations going on even to do that basic representation. How realistic, again, it is, I don't know, right? Because I don't have a base level of knowledge that can tell me how realistic Eagle Dynamics is recreating those things. I think they do a great job of approximating and representing those things. But as I said yesterday, I don't know necessarily if that's indicative of exactly how that radar works. So I think we need to cool our heels a little bit about some of this stuff. And overall, I think the F-35 is kind of a gauntlet throwdown to the other simulation manufacturers out there in terms of what Eagle Dynamics is going to offer. And I think that in a competitive environment, which people have complained about for years that there isn't any competition, well, if we're going to have a competitive environment or some sort of challenges to make sure ED stays relevant, then it would make sense that you would, as we move further along in the development process here of aircraft, then it would make sense that you would start to look at aircraft that are in the modern era. Remember too that a lot of, as we go on and on and on, a lot of the people involved in flight simulation don't remember some of these aircraft that we have that are older. They're starting to see more of these more modern jets. And so when I grew up, in the 80s and 90s, Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom. This is where we saw the Tornadoes, we saw the F-16s, the F-15Es. So those are the things that you grow up with. Those are the aircraft that you kind of fall in love with and want to fly. Well, now we've moved into this new era, and when the F-35 first kind of came out, it was pretty ugly looking jet. It didn't really appeal to me at all. Now that I've spent some time looking at it and understanding what it does, its shape really is irrelevant in the context of modern warfare. So again, as an evolutionary point of view in the game, I think in some ways, and of course financially, from business decision, I think it makes sense that ED has it in the game. What the final guise looks like, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Like I said, there is quite a lot of open source material about this. I think there's probably enough, based on what I'm seeing, that it would make sense to me that they could recreate it. People will disagree with that. Because again, it's against that backdrop of how much realism there really is, what is publicly available, and producing a realistic experience. And of course, you're not going to have F-35 pilots necessarily coming in and saying, whoa, that's not realistic. This is how it works. What you're going to have, as I said before, is people saying, yeah, it's not bad. And if a real pilot says, yeah, that's not bad, then that's good enough for me, because what the hell do I know, right? That's all I'll say on that. Overall, I think it's a really interesting decision. And we'll leave it there. Thanks for tuning in again. Let me know what your thoughts are, what you're looking forward to this year in DCS world, especially with regards to the dynamic campaign, the Eurofighter, and the overall improvements, the core engine improvements that they continue to talk about. It's an exciting time to be in flight simulation. Cheers. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Make 3, bandit 055 at 20, 36,000, make 3.